Before listening, please note that the following story may evoke emotions related to family, humanity, and personal responsibility. This content is created for educational purposes, encouraging understanding, compassion, and reflection on choices that may have a lasting impact on life. If you are not ready to engage with this material, please consider pausing before continuing. The corner of West Madison Street was loud in the way only a big American city could be. Car engines idling, distant sirens, footsteps rushing past without rhythm or mercy. People moved with purpose, eyes forward, minds already somewhere else. No one stopped. No one ever did. Lila Monroe had learned that lesson early. At 7 years old, she stood near the bus stop, holding a small paper cup with the words, "Please help," written in uneven letters. A volunteer had helped her write them once, back when she still stayed at a shelter. That shelter no longer had room, and the volunteer no longer came. Lila didn't look up at faces. Looking at people made them uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people turned away faster. Instead, she watched shoes, polished leather, worn sneakers, heels that clicked sharply against the sidewalk. Shoes told her who might slow down and who definitely wouldn't. It was just past 2 in the afternoon when the man walked by. He moved differently from the others. Fast, confident, distracted in a way that suggested he believed the world would adjust around him. He wore a tailored gray suit, the kind Lila had only ever seen through glass windows. His shoes were clean. His watch caught the sunlight and flashed briefly, like a signal meant for someone else. His name was Evan Monroe. Lila didn't know that yet. What she knew was that he didn't see her. As he passed, his arms swung wide, and something slipped from the inside pocket of his jacket. It fell to the sidewalk with a soft thud, landing just inches from Lila's worn sneakers. A wallet. Time slowed in that strange way it sometimes does when life is about to change. Lila stared at it. Her first instinct, sharp and practiced, was to grab it and run. She knew exactly where to go. There was a pawn shop 3 blocks down that didn't ask questions, a place where no one cared how a child came into possession of adult things. Her fingers twitched, then she saw the photograph. It was tucked into a clear slot on the inside, visible even without opening the wallet. A woman stared back at her from the picture, smiling softly. Dark hair, kind eyes, a familiar curve to her mouth. Lila's breath caught painfully in her throat. Her mother, Hannah Monroe. The cup slipped from Lila's hand and rolled onto its side, coins scattering across the pavement. She didn't notice. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The noise of the city faded into something distant and unreal. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Footsteps stopped abruptly in front of her. Evan had realized his wallet was gone. He turned back, irritation already forming on his lips, until he saw the girl standing frozen beside it, staring as though she'd seen a ghost. "Hey," he said, reaching down. "Thanks for—" Lila looked up at him then. Her eyes were wide, filled with something far deeper than fear. Recognition. Pain. Something broken open. "Why do you have my mom's picture?" she demanded. The words cut through the air, sharp and impossible. Evan froze. For a moment, the city continued around them. People brushing past, cars honking, life rushing on as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something had shifted. Evan slowly straightened, his hand hovering uselessly in midair. He looked at the wallet, at the photograph, back at the child in front of him. The resemblance struck him all at once. The same dark eyes, the same shape of the face. A chill ran through him, cold and unmistakable. "What did you just say?" he asked quietly. Lila's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "That's my mom," she said. "Her name is Hannah." And in that moment, on a crowded Chicago sidewalk, surrounded by strangers who didn't notice a thing, 2 lives that had never been meant to touch collided over a photograph that carried a truth neither of them was ready to face. For several long seconds, Evan Monroe didn't move. The city continued to flow around them, indifferent and impatient. A woman brushed past his shoulder. Someone cursed about a late bus. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and faded again. Life went on, as it always did. But Evan felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He looked down at the wallet still lying between them. then back at the girl. She was small, painfully thin, her jacket far too light for the season. Dirt smudged her cheeks, but beneath it he could see the outline of a face that stirred something deeply uncomfortable in him. "Your mom?" he asked again, slower this time. "You said that's your mom?" The girl nodded. Her chin trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on the photograph, as if looking away might make it disappear. "My mom," she said. "Hannah Monroe." The name landed between them like a weight. Evan swallowed. His mouth felt dry. Hannah Monroe was not a name he heard spoken out loud. Not ever. It lived in old memories, in arguments that had ended with slammed doors, in silence that followed questions no one was allowed to ask. He bent down slowly and picked up the wallet, careful not to break whatever fragile thing was holding the moment together. He opened it and removed the photo, holding it in the light. The woman in the picture looked younger than Evan remembered her. Soft smile, tired eyes, the kind of expression that suggested warmth rather than ambition. She was standing in front of a modest house, sunlight catching her hair. He felt a tightening in his chest. "This," he began, then stopped. He had no idea how to finish the sentence. Lila watched him closely now. Years of living without protection had taught her how to read adults, their lies, their impatience, their danger. Evan didn't look angry. He didn't look confused in the way people pretended to be confused. He looked shaken. "You know her," Lila said. It wasn't a question. Evan let out a slow breath. "I knew her," he replied carefully. "A long time ago." Lila hugged her arms around herself. "She got sick," she said quietly. "She tried not to let me know, but I knew. Kids always know." Something in her voice, the calm way she spoke about loss, unsettled him more than tears would have. "She died last winter," Lila continued. "After that, they sent me to a house with other kids. I didn't stay." Evan frowned. "Why not?" She hesitated, eyes dropping to the ground. "Because some places aren't safe," she said simply. The words hit him harder than any explanation could have. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. 3 months, Lila replied. "Maybe more. I stopped counting." Evan straightened and glanced around them. People passed within inches of the child, some close enough to touch, yet none of them looked at her. It was as if she existed in a different layer of reality, visible but unseen. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked. Lila shook her head. The answer was quick, practiced. Evan felt something twist inside him, an emotion he didn't have a name for, something between guilt and responsibility, though he wasn't yet ready to admit either. "Come with me," he said suddenly. Lila stiffened. Every muscle in her body went tight. "No," she said. "I don't go with men." The blunt honesty startled him. Evan raised both hands instinctively, palms open. "That's fair," he said. "I wouldn't either. Listen, I'm not asking you to trust me. I just want to talk somewhere quieter, somewhere warm." She studied him, eyes sharp, weighing his words against her instincts. "Where?" she asked. "My apartment," he replied. Then, seeing her expression harden, he added quickly, "Or a diner, or anywhere you choose." Lila thought for a long moment. The wind cut through her jacket, and she shivered despite herself. "A diner," she said finally, "with people." Evan nodded. "A diner it is." They walked side by side in silence, Evan matching his pace to her short steps. He was acutely aware of how tall he must seem to her, how overwhelming the world looked from her height. He remembered being 7. Remembered how adults had seemed like unmovable structures, incapable of seeing what was right in front of them. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and grease. Evan ordered grilled cheese and soup for Lila without asking. She ate slowly at first, suspicious, then faster as hunger took over. He watched her eat, pretending not to notice, the way she positioned herself close to the wall, how her eyes flicked to the door every time someone entered. "Did your mom ever talk about me?" he asked quietly. Lila paused, soup spoon halfway to her mouth. "She talked about a man," she said after a moment. "She said he was kind, but afraid. She said sometimes people choose safety over truth." Evan closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Hannah. "She never said your name," Lila added. "But she kept that picture, She said it mattered. Evan stared down at the table. For years, his mother, Dorothy Monroe, had insisted Hannah was a mistake, a phase, someone who had tried to attach herself to the family name. Yet the woman Lila described didn't sound like a schemer. She sounded like someone who had loved quietly, endured privately, and paid the price alone. "What happens now?" Lila asked suddenly. The question startled him. It was the kind of question adults asked each other in boardrooms and hospitals, not something a child should have to voice. "I don't know," Evan admitted. "But I do know this. You're not going back to the street tonight." Lila looked at him, searching his face for certainty. "And tomorrow?" she asked. Evan met her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, choosing his words carefully, "we start finding answers." Outside, the city lights flickered on as evening settled in. Inside the diner, an unlikely pair sat across from each other. One, a man who had spent his life surrounded by wealth but starved of truth. The other, a child who had lost everything except the strength to survive. Neither of them knew it yet, but the life they'd been living up until that afternoon was already over. The elevator ride was silent. Lila stood close to the wall, her hands folded tightly in front of her, eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the door as they climbed higher and higher. 12, 21, 30. She had never been in an elevator this long before, never been this high above the ground. Evan watched her from the corner of his eye. She tried to look calm, but her shoulders were tense, her breathing shallow. She was bracing herself for danger, for disappointment, for being told she didn't belong. When the elevator finally stopped on the 42nd floor, the doors slid open to a hallway so quiet it felt unreal. Thick carpet muffled every sound. Soft lighting glowed from recessed fixtures. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something expensive Lila didn't have a name for. "This is it," Evan said gently. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting her enter first. Lila froze. The apartment stretched out before her, wide and open, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Lights flickered below like constellations fallen to earth. Everything was clean, still, untouched. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place people visited and left. Lila took one careful step inside, then another. Her shoes made no sound on the polished floor. She half expected someone to shout at her for touching something, for breathing wrong, for existing in a space she hadn't earned. "You can sit anywhere," Evan said. "You're not going to break anything." She nodded but remained standing. From this height, the city looked smaller, manageable, less cruel. The streets where she'd slept felt far away, like another life. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "Yes," Evan replied after a pause. "I always have." He set his keys down, loosened his tie, then stopped, unsure what to do next. He had closed billion-dollar deals, with more confidence than he felt standing in his own living room, with a 7-year-old girl who had just torn his past open. "Would you like some water?" he asked. "Or juice?" "Water's fine," Lila said. He poured 2 glasses, his hands shaking just enough for him to notice. When he handed her one, their fingers brushed briefly. Lila flinched before she could stop herself. Evan noticed. "I won't touch you unless you say it's okay," he said quietly. She studied his face, then nodded once. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a careful distance between them. Lila perched on the edge, ready to run if she needed to. Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the photograph now resting on the coffee table between them. "That picture," he said finally. "It was taken 20 years ago." Lila leaned closer. "She looks happy." Evan swallowed. She was. The word felt heavy. "My family didn't approve of her," he continued. "They thought she was inconvenient." Lila frowned. "My mom wasn't inconvenient." "No," Evan said quickly. "She wasn't. But my family had rules, expectations, appearances to maintain." He stood and walked to a bookshelf along the far wall, pulling out a thin leather album. He flipped through it, stopping at a page near the back. "Do you see this?" he asked, holding it out. Lila climbed down from the sofa and approached cautiously. The photograph showed a much younger Evan, standing stiffly beside a woman with sharp eyes and perfect posture, Dorothy Monroe. Between them was a man with Evan's face, older, heavier with responsibility. His hand rested possessively on Dorothy's shoulder. "Your grandma?" Lila asked. Evan nodded. Dorothy Monroe. She looks angry. She usually was, he said, without bitterness. Just truth. Lila studied the man in the picture. Is that your dad? Yes. She tilted her head. He doesn't look happy either. Evan let out a quiet breath. No, he wasn't. Silence settled again, thick and thoughtful. My mom used to say something, Lila said suddenly. She said some people live in big houses but never feel safe inside them. Evan felt the words land somewhere deep. That sounds like her, he murmured. He returned to the sofa, sitting closer this time, but not too close. Lila, he said gently, I need to ask you something important. She stiffened again. Okay. Did your mom ever say my name? Lila shook her head. No, but she said if I ever saw her picture somewhere strange, I should tell the truth, even if I was scared. Evan closed his eyes. Hannah had known. She had prepared for this possibility in her own quiet way. There are things about my family you need to understand, he said. They don't like surprises, and they don't like being challenged. Are they bad people? Lila asked. Evan thought carefully. They're people who chose comfort over courage, he said at last. Lila absorbed this. My mom chose courage. Yes, Evan said softly. She did. Night had fully fallen outside now. The city glowed beneath them, endless and restless. Evan glanced at the clock on the wall. You can stay here tonight, he said. I've already called a lawyer, an old family lawyer. His name is Mr. Callahan. Lila's eyes widened. Am I in trouble? No, Evan said firmly. You're being protected. The word seemed foreign to her. Tomorrow, he continued, we're going to talk to him. We're going to ask questions, and we're going to find out why my father made sure your mother was never forgotten. Lila hugged the glass of water to her chest. And if your family doesn't like me? She asked quietly. Evan looked at her then. Really looked at her. The child who had survived cold sidewalks and empty nights. The child who carried her mother's dignity like armor. Then they'll have to learn, he said, voice steady, that some truths don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Lila nodded slowly. For the first time since she'd entered the apartment, she leaned back against the sofa, not relaxed, but not ready to flee either. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, a secret that had been buried for decades was awake now, stretching, preparing to demand answers. And Evan Monroe knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that by morning, nothing about his carefully controlled life would remain untouched. Mr. Callahan's office sat on the 36th floor of a stone-gray building overlooking the river, the kind of building that had been standing long before Evan Monroe was born, and would likely still be standing long after him. Lila noticed the quiet first. Not the peaceful kind, the controlled kind. The carpet muted footsteps. The walls were lined with framed degrees and black and white, photographs of men in suits shaking hands with other men in suits. No children, no color, no warmth. This place smells like rules, Lila whispered. Evan almost smiled. Mr. Callahan rose slowly from behind his desk when they entered. He was tall once, Evan suspected, but age had softened his posture. His hair was silver, his glasses thin. His eyes, however, were sharp. Eyes that had seen secrets and learned how to lock them away. Evan, he said evenly. Then his gaze shifted downward. He stopped. His eyes rested on Lila. Not dismissive, not kind, measuring. And who is this? He asked. This, Evan said, placing a hand lightly on Lila's shoulder without touching skin, is Lila Monroe. Mr. Callahan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Recognition, or something close to it. Sit, he said. They did. Evan told the story from the beginning. The wallet, the photograph, the name Hannah Monroe, spoken aloud on a crowded sidewalk like it had never been forbidden. He spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it might later be used against him. Mr. Callahan listened without interrupting, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Evan finished, the lawyer leaned back slowly. You understand, he said, that what you're suggesting carries serious implications. I understand that my father lied, Evan replied. Mr. Callahan didn't flinch. Your father was a complicated man. He was a coward, Evan said quietly. The old lawyer exhaled through his nose. That too. He turned to Lila. Young lady, how old are you? 7, she said. And your mother's name? Hannah Monroe. Mr. Callahan nodded once, as if checking a box on a list no one else could see. She worked as a teacher, Lila continued, voice steady. She didn't take money she didn't earn. She didn't like lies. Evan closed his eyes. The lawyer stood and crossed the room, opening a locked cabinet. He removed a thick folder, its edges worn, the label faded. I was instructed, Mr. Callahan said, returning to his desk, to open this only if a very specific condition was met. He placed the folder down between them. If a child bearing Hannah Monroe's name comes forward. The room went very still. Evan's heart pounded in his ears. Inside the folder were documents, bank statements, letters, legal filings. A life hidden in paper. Your father established a private trust, Mr. Callahan continued. One that existed outside the family estate. It was deliberate. How much? Evan asked. Mr. Callahan removed his glasses, enough that it was never meant to be discovered casually. Lila watched Evan's face drain of color. This trust, the lawyer added, names a single beneficiary, a child. No name listed. Only a clause requiring biological verification. Evan looked at Lila. She looked back at him, calm in a way that unsettled him. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Mr. Callahan said gently, that there are people who will be very unhappy you are sitting here today. The door to the office opened without a knock. Dorothy Monroe entered like she owned the space, which, in a way, she always had. She wore a dark coat tailored to perfection. Her hair was immaculately styled. Her eyes moved first to Evan, then to Lila, where they stopped, hardened. This is unacceptable, Dorothy said coldly. I warned you not to involve outsiders. Evan stood. She is not an outsider. Dorothy laughed once, sharp and humorless. She is a street child with a story. Lila felt Evan tense beside her. My husband made mistakes, Dorothy continued, but I will not allow his legacy to be exploited. My mom is not exploiting anyone, Lila said quietly. Dorothy turned to her slowly. Adults are speaking. Evan stepped forward. You will not talk to her like that. Dorothy's gaze flicked back to her son. You are being manipulated. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. Mrs. Monroe, the documents? I know exactly what those documents say, Dorothy snapped. And they do not change the fact that this child has no place in this family. Silence fell. Then Mr. Callahan spoke, voice firm. Mrs. Monroe, legally speaking, that remains to be determined. Dorothy's eyes narrowed. You are suggesting what I think you are? I am suggesting, he said evenly, that we follow the law. Dorothy laughed again. Fine, then let us follow it all the way. She turned to Lila. If you are who you say you are, Dorothy said, prove it. Evan felt a chill. Mr. Callahan nodded once. A DNA test. Lila looked up at Evan. Does it hurt? He swallowed. No, he said, and you will not be alone. Dorothy reached for her phone. I will have my attorneys notified. Evan spoke before she could leave. If the test proves she is family, he said, what then? Dorothy paused at the door. She did not turn around. Then she replied, everything becomes a war. The door closed behind her. Lila broke the silence. She does not like me. No, Evan said quietly. She does not like the truth. Mr. Callahan gathered the papers carefully. From this moment forward, he said, nothing will be simple. Every move will be questioned. Every intention examined. Lila nodded. I am used to that. Evan looked at her, something heavy settling in his chest. He had walked into that office expecting answers. Instead, he had stepped into a battle that would demand something far more dangerous than money. It would demand loyalty. And as they left the building together, Evan knew with unsettling clarity that the choice he would soon have to make would cost him everything he had been raised to protect. The DNA testing facility didn't look like a place where lives were decided. It was small, neutral, too clean. White walls, pale blue chairs, a television mounted high in the corner playing a daytime talk show no one was watching. Evan thought that if places had souls, this one had been scrubbed of its own. Lila sat beside him, feet dangling above the floor. She swung them gently, as if this were just another errand. Another appointment like the free clinic or the school counselor. She had once seen for 3 sessions before funding ran out. A nurse called their names. Monroe? Evan stood immediately. Lila followed. Inside the room, the procedure took less than 5 minutes. A cotton swab, a plastic tube. No pain, no blood, nothing dramatic at all. It felt wrong that something so simple could change everything. When it was done, Lila looked up at Evan. "Is that it?" "That's it," he said. She nodded. "Okay." As they walked back into the waiting area, Evan felt something press against his ribs. Fear, sharp and uninvited. Not fear of the result, fear of what would follow it. Dorothy Monroe's attorneys moved fast. By the time the results came back, conclusive, indisputable, motions had already been filed. Emergency hearings requested. Claims of coercion. Allegations that Evan was being manipulated by a minor whose background was unstable. The word echoed in Evan's mind. Unstable. They called her unstable because she had survived. The courtroom was smaller than Evan expected. Wood-paneled, formal, almost intimate. The kind of place where voices carried and silence weighed heavy. Lila sat beside him, legs tucked into the chair. Hands folded in her lap, the way she had been taught to sit in foster homes. Quiet, unobtrusive, easy to overlook. Dorothy sat across the aisle, perfectly composed, flanked by 2 attorneys whose suits probably cost more than most people's rent. She did not look at Lila. She did not need to. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Proceedings began. Dorothy's lead attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. He talked about family integrity, about protecting estates from fraudulent claims, about the dangers of emotional manipulation. He gestured vaguely in Lila's direction without ever saying her name. Children in vulnerable situations, he said, can be coached, influenced, used. Evan felt his jaw tighten. When it was his turn, Evan stood. "My name is Evan Monroe," he said, "and this child is my sister." A murmur rippled through the room. Dorothy's attorney objected immediately. "That has not been legally established." Evan didn't look at him. He looked at the judge. "The DNA results establish biological relation beyond any reasonable doubt," he said. "But more than that, this is about responsibility." Dorothy leaned forward slightly. "Responsibility," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Monroe, please continue." Evan took a breath. "My father hid the truth. He failed both my sister and my mother. I won't repeat that mistake." Dorothy's attorney rose again. "With respect, this is not about emotion. It is about guardianship. My client questions whether Mr. Monroe is fit to serve in that role." The words hit harder than Evan expected. The judge turned to Dorothy. "Mrs. Monroe, do you wish to address the court?" Dorothy stood gracefully, her posture impeccable. "My husband made regrettable choices," she said calmly. "But this," she gestured toward Lila for the first time, "is not family. It is a complication, and complications destroy legacies." Lila stiffened. Dorothy continued. "This child has no stability, no proven background, no environment that supports development." Evan couldn't stay silent. "She's been homeless because no one stepped up," he said. "Not because she's incapable." Dorothy turned to him. "You are blinded by guilt." "No," Evan replied. "I'm guided by conscience." The judge cleared his throat. "Enough." He looked down at Lila. "Young lady, would you like to say anything?" Lila's eyes widened. She looked at Evan, panic flickering for just a second. Evan leaned down. "Only if you want to," he whispered. Lila nodded slowly. She stood, barely tall enough to see over the podium. "My mom taught me to tell the truth," she said quietly. The courtroom leaned in. "She said sometimes telling the truth makes people angry," Lila continued. "But that doesn't mean it's wrong." Dorothy looked away. I don't want anyone's money, Lila said. I just want to be somewhere safe. The judge watched her carefully. After a long pause, he spoke. Pending final review, he said, temporary guardianship will be granted to Mr. Evan Monroe. Dorothy's head snapped up. This is a mistake. It is a legal decision, the judge replied evenly. Court adjourned. The gavel struck. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Evan shielded Lila instinctively, guiding her through the crowd. Behind them, Dorothy stood alone. That night, Evan received the letter. It was short, precise, written in his mother's unmistakable hand. If you proceed with this, you are no longer my son. Evan read it once, then again. Lila watched him from the couch. Is she mad? She asked. Evan folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She's choosing something else, he said. Lila considered this. My mom used to say people choose what they're afraid to lose. Evan nodded. Yes, he said. She did. Later, as Lila slept in the guest room, wrapped in clean sheets, breathing softly, Evan stood alone at the window. The city stretched below him, vast and indifferent. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly why. The first night Lila slept in Evan's apartment, she didn't really sleep. She lay still beneath clean sheets that smelled faintly of detergent and something floral she couldn't name, listening to the unfamiliar quiet. No sirens outside the window, no shouting through thin walls, no footsteps approaching the door in the middle of the night. Her body didn't believe the silence. She woke every hour, heart racing, waiting for something bad to happen, because in her experience, safety never lasted. When morning light finally filtered through the curtains, pale and gentle, she sat up slowly, surprised to find herself still there, still safe. In the kitchen, Evan was already awake. He hadn't slept much either. He stood at the counter, staring into a mug of coffee gone cold, his tie draped over a chair like an abandoned thought. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. Good morning, he said carefully, as if the word itself might be too loud. Lila nodded. You didn't leave? No, he replied. I said I wouldn't. They ate breakfast quietly. Toast, scrambled eggs, orange juice. Ordinary food. Ordinary plates. Lila held her fork like someone who had been corrected too many times before. Careful not to make mistakes. You don't have to sit so straight, Evan said gently. She shrugged. That's how they liked it. Who? All of them. Evan didn't ask her to explain. He had learned that pushing for details before someone was ready only taught them to retreat deeper. That afternoon, Evan took Lila to a small elementary school not far from the apartment. The building was old but warm, its hallways filled with children's artwork taped to the walls. Crayon drawings of families, houses, sons with smiling faces. Lila stopped in front of one picture. A stick-figure family stood under a crooked roof, all holding hands. She swallowed. The school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Bennett. She had soft gray hair and a voice that moved slowly. She spoke with Evan in her office while Lila sat in the corner, drawing quietly. She's been through a lot, Mrs. Bennett said. We'll start gently. Short days, no pressure. Evan nodded. Thank you. Lila looked up. Do I have to stay forever? Mrs. Bennett smiled kindly. Just for today. That answer seemed to satisfy her. The therapist came next. Dr. Elaine Foster had kind eyes, but didn't smile too much. She didn't lean forward or ask Lila to talk about her feelings right away. Instead, she handed her a small box of colored pencils and paper. Draw where you feel safest, she said. Lila drew a park bench under a streetlight. Evan watched from the hallway, his chest tightening. Healing, he learned, did not arrive with dramatic breakthroughs. It came in inches, in pauses, in moments that looked insignificant from the outside. At night, Lila insisted on keeping the bedroom door open. Evan slept lightly on the couch, his door open too, just in case. Sometimes she padded into the living room in the early hours, eyes wide, breath uneven. I had a bad dream, she would whisper. He never asked what it was about. He simply sat with her until her breathing slowed, until her shoulders relaxed, until she returned to bed on her own. Weeks passed. Lila began to laugh again, quietly at first, as if testing whether the sound was allowed. She laughed when Evan burned the toast, when the dog downstairs barked at its own reflection in the elevator mirror, when she beat Evan at a board game she'd never played before. She still flinched when doors slammed, still froze when voices rose too suddenly. But she no longer slept in her shoes. One evening, Evan took her to the cemetery. Hannah Monroe's grave was simple, a small stone, her name, her dates. No long inscription. Lila knelt in front of it, fingers tracing the letters she already knew by heart. "I found him," she whispered. "Like you said I would." Evan stood a few steps back, hands in his pockets, giving her space. "She would have liked you," Lila said without turning around. Evan swallowed hard. "I wish I'd known her better." "She said you were kind," Lila replied. "Just scared." That night, Lila slept through until morning. The court hearings slowed. The headlines faded. Dorothy Monroe stopped calling. Evan's life grew smaller and richer. He turned down business dinners, left meetings early, learned how to pack lunches and braid hair with the help of online tutorials. One afternoon, Lila came home from school, holding a paper folded carefully in her backpack. "I made something," she said. She handed it to him. It was a drawing. Two figures stood side by side, one tall, one small. Above them, in uneven letters, were the words, "This is my family." Evan felt his vision blur. "That's really good," he said. Lila studied his face. "You're crying." "Yes," he admitted. "But it's a good kind." She nodded, accepting that explanation easily. Later that night, Evan sat alone at his desk, reviewing legal documents he hadn't touched in weeks. Among them was a letter he'd avoided reading again, the one from his mother. He didn't open it. He already knew what it said. What mattered now was the sound of laughter drifting from the bedroom, the steady rhythm of a child who felt safe enough to sleep. For the first time, Evan understood something his father never had. Protection wasn't about money or reputation. It was about staying. And as Lila curled into sleep that night, wrapped in warmth she was finally learning to trust, Evan made a quiet promise, to her and to himself. This time, no one would disappear. Lila Monroe turned 18 on a quiet morning in late spring. No cameras, no headlines, no ceremony beyond a small cake Evan had picked up from the bakery downstairs, the kind with too much frosting and a candle that leaned slightly to one side. He set it on the kitchen table beside a single card. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at him. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything now," Evan replied. They sat across from each other as sunlight filled the room, warmer than it had been in years. Lila had grown taller, still small by most standards, but no longer fragile. Her hair fell past her shoulders now, usually tied back the way she liked it. Her eyes, once guarded and searching, held something steady, belonging. After breakfast, they walked together to Mr. Callahan's office. The lawyer was older now, slower in his movements. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "Happy birthday," he said to Lila, smiling over his glasses. "Legally speaking, today is a significant one." She nodded. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." Mr. Callahan slid a folder across the desk. "Everything is now officially in your name," he explained. "The trust, the accounts, the remainder of the estate. You have access, full access." Lila didn't reach for it. Instead, she asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. If my mom were here," she said carefully, "what would she want me to do?" Mr. Callahan paused. He glanced at Evan, then back at Lila. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd want you to choose what lets you sleep at night." That afternoon, Evan watched from the doorway as Lila sat alone in her room, papers spread across the floor, numbers, projections, legal language she'd spent years learning to understand. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was focused. That evening, she came to him with a calm he hadn't expected. "I've made a decision," she said. Evan set down his laptop. "I'm listening." "I don't want a big house," Lila continued. "I don't want private drivers or parties or things that make people look at me differently." Evan nodded. None of that surprised him. "I want to start something," she said. "Something that lasts." He waited. "I want to help kids like me," she said simply. the ones who disappear between systems, the ones people don't see. Evan felt a familiar tightening in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear, it was pride. The foundation took shape quietly. No press release, no gala announcement, just meetings with social workers, housing advocates, counselors. Lila listened more than she spoke, asked careful questions, took notes. She chose a building she'd walked past 100 times when she'd lived on the street. A 4-story brick structure with boarded windows and a cracked front step. "This one," she said. "It's close to the bus line and the park." Evan smiled. "You've thought this through." "I had time," she replied. When the center opened, there was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just a key turning in a lock and a door opening. The first night, 17 children slept there. 17 children with backpacks full of everything they owned. 17 children who flinched at sudden noises. 17 children who didn't believe promises. Lila walked the halls that night, checking doors, adjusting blankets, answering questions she knew by heart. "Will I have to leave tomorrow? Is this just for one night? What if I mess up?" "You're safe," she told them, "and you're not in trouble." One boy asked her, "How do you know?" She sat beside him on the bed. "Because I was you," she said. Word spread, not fast but steady. More centers followed, in cities where Lila had once passed through unnoticed. Each location run by people who understood that safety wasn't just a roof, it was consistency. Evan watched it all with quiet awe. He had once measured success in numbers and acquisitions. Now he measured it in smaller things. The way Lila remembered every child's name. The way she knelt to speak at eye level. The way she never promised what she couldn't deliver. Dorothy Monroe never came back into their lives. Sometimes Evan wondered if Lila felt the absence. One night, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, he asked her, "Do you ever think about her?" he said. Lila considered the question. "I think about who she chose to be," she said finally, "and I'm okay with her choice." Evan nodded. He was too. Years later, reporters would ask Lila about the money, about the inheritance, about the family drama that had once surrounded her name. She would always answer the same way. "The money gave me options," she'd say, "but love gave me direction." On the night before the second center opened, Lila stood alone in the hallway, lights dimmed, listening to the quiet hum of a place built for staying. Evan joined her. "You did this," he said. She shook her head. "We did." He smiled. And as they stood there, no longer a rescuer and a child, but two people who had chosen each other, they both understood something simple and rare. The past no longer defined them. The choices they made did. The first snow of December fell quietly. Lila Monroe stood on the front steps of the newest center, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air as children filed inside behind her. Some clutched donated coats too big for their shoulders. Others carried plastic bags with everything they owned. All of them paused for just a second at the doorway, unsure whether they were truly allowed to enter. Lila recognized that hesitation. She'd worn it once, too. "Come on," she said gently. "You're home." Inside, the building hummed with life. Radiators clicked and warmed. Soup simmered in the kitchen. Volunteers moved softly, careful not to overwhelm the quiet hope settling into the walls. Evan watched from the side, hands tucked into his coat pockets. He no longer felt like he was standing guard. He felt like he belonged there, like this place, somehow, had been waiting for him as much as it had been waiting for her. When the last child was settled, Lila stepped back outside for a moment of air. The city stretched out before her, familiar and changed all at once. These streets had once swallowed her whole. Now they felt smaller, not because they'd changed, but because she had. Evan joined her on the steps. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking." About how close I came to disappearing," she said quietly. "And how close so many of them still are." Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. They stood there in silence, snow collecting on the railing, the world slowing just enough to be felt. Later that night, after the volunteers left and the building settled into sleep, Lila walked the halls one last time. She checked doors, straightened blankets, paused at each room, listening to the steady breathing of children, who, for this night at least, felt safe enough to rest. She stopped in front of the smallest room. At the end of the hall, a little girl lay curled on her side, thumb pressed against her lips, eyes darting beneath closed lids. Lila sat on the edge of the bed without waking her. "I know," she whispered. It takes time. When Lila finally returned to her office, she opened a drawer and removed the photograph. It was the same one that had once lived inside a stranger's wallet. Hannah Monroe smiled back at her, frozen in a moment that had changed everything. "I think you'd like this," Lila said softly. "I think you'd understand." She placed the photo back in the drawer, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Some losses never fully healed, but they could still give birth to something good. Months later, Lila stood in front of a small audience. Social workers, donors, former residents, a few reporters scribbling notes. No spotlight, no grand stage, just a microphone and her voice. "I don't have a dramatic story of rescue," she said. "No one swooped in to save me when I needed it most. What changed my life wasn't a miracle. It was a choice." She glanced briefly at Evan in the front row. Someone chose to stay. And because of that, I learned I could choose too. She paused, letting the words settle. This place exists because there are children all around us. They are doing their best to survive in a world that keeps looking past them. They don't need pity. They need presence. They need consistency. They need adults who won't disappear. Applause filled the room. Not loud, not performative, but real. Afterward, as people filtered out, a man approached her quietly. "My sister lived on the streets," he said. "She didn't make it. I just wanted to say, thank you for seeing the ones who still can." Lila took his hand. "I see her too," she said. That night, she and Evan walked home together. "You ever think about how close it all was?" Evan asked. "If I hadn't dropped that wallet?" Lila smiled faintly. "I think about it sometimes." "And?" he pressed. "I think the truth has a way of finding daylight," she said, "even if it takes a while." They stopped at the corner where it had all begun. The bus stop was still there, the sidewalk unchanged. People still rushed past, eyes forward, minds elsewhere. But Lila didn't feel invisible anymore. Years later, when she was asked to sum up her life in a single sentence, she didn't talk about money or inheritance or courtrooms. She said this: "I learned that the most powerful legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you refuse to abandon." And if you're listening to this story right now, if something about it feels uncomfortably familiar, it might be because there are people around you who are easier to overlook than to help. So here's the truth Lila learned the hard way. Sometimes changing a life doesn't require heroics. Sometimes it just requires staying. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about compassion, responsibility, and choosing to care, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Because the stories we tell are often the ones that teach us who we want to be.